we all know that the Nintendo Switch is a fantastic console with so many different games to choose from, but now that the Nintendo Switch 2 is out, what's going to happen to the system? When is the system going to go completely offline? Games are going to stop pouring in, and what's next? Anyways, thank you to Isaiah Fisher for this fantastic video idea. This is something that is really interesting, and I'm going to try to answer the big question to the best of my ability. Anyways, let's get straight into it. Okay, now for starters, the Nintendo Switch. There is still so many fantastic games coming out to the system, so you don't have to be worried about your Nintendo Switch suddenly just gone, kaput, it's out, it's outdated, whatever. No. I think that it's still going strong because in 2025, we still got plenty of different games coming out to the system. We got Metroid Prime 4, Pokemon Legends ZA, and a couple other games. Indie games are still releasing on Nintendo Switch, so overall, that's pretty great. In 2026, we're getting Tamagotchi Life, and we're also getting Pokemon Champions. And we're probably going to be seeing a couple more games throughout the year. And who knows, for the 40th anniversary, I believe we're going to get even more games for the Nintendo Switch. Now, if you were going to give me the question of, okay, so when are the games going to go offline? When are we going to stop seeing games? That, I feel, would be roughly 2027. Now, 2027 would be 10 years after the Nintendo Switch originally launched. And I feel like after 10 years, it's like, well, the hardware is a little bit outdated and, some of that stuff. And they're probably going to want developers to focus more on Nintendo Switch 2 to get more of that power, graphically enhanced, and honestly, seeing all that frame rate. But for the online functionality, just because the games aren't going to exist anymore, we're not going to be seeing new games for Nintendo Switch, doesn't mean that the online service is just going to shut down all of a sudden afterwards. If we're going to take a look at the 3DS and the Wii U, those shut down roughly 13 years after those consoles were released. So the Nintendo Switch shouldn't have a problem with that. Because one of the main gimmicks of the Nintendo Switch 2 is being able to game share your games. No matter if you're on a Nintendo Switch 2 or you're in Nintendo Switch 1. You can game share, you can stream your games, play online, and just have fun. That is one of the main gimmicks of the Switch 2. You gotta remember that Nintendo is pushing half of these gimmicks. Just like the fact that the CEO of Nintendo said that if you can't own a Nintendo Switch 2, if you can't buy one or whatever, buy a Nintendo Switch 1. So if they just all of a sudden get rid of the online service, get rid of all of this stuff, what kind of thing is that? Now I know we're probably talking 5 years in the future, but it's still something to consider when you're looking at this big question. Now, for me, I think that the Nintendo Switch 2's probably gonna take the spotlight near 2030, 2031. The Nintendo Switch is still gonna be around, still doing its Nintendo Switch thing, but if you're gonna give me my best guess, I'm gonna say that the Nintendo Switch online service is probably gonna start to shut down around 2033. Now, this is a couple years from now, and hey, the Nintendo Switch is still pretty great because, if you don't want to get a Nintendo Switch 2, you don't have to get a Nintendo Switch 2 because it's only got 2 games exclusive so far. But the Nintendo Switch has a giant lineup of games. And since the Nintendo Switch 2 is essentially just a more beefed up Nintendo Switch, well then why would you get rid of it? It's essentially basically the same console. Why would you want to get rid of it? Sure, you can stop the production of the games. But since these two consoles are linked together, if someone wants to play Mario Kart 8 Deluxe online on Switch 2, well then they can do that. So I don't think that the online service will be shut down at this point. It won't be shut down until roughly the Nintendo Switch 2 is gonna get a new console at some point. It's gonna be Nintendo something, like a different name, completely different than Switches. The Switches are probably going to live together, okay? So in 2027, we're probably going to see the discontinuation of the games. Like the games for getting new games, for example, like Pokemon Generation 11 or something like that. We're probably going to stop seeing, different games that's coming out to the system, but that doesn't mean the online service is just going to shut down, because once again, the Nintendo Switch 2 relies on the Switch 1 to keep players happy, and hey, it's a pretty fantastic kind of mix and match where no matter if you're playing on Swish 2 or you're playing on Switch 1, you guys can play together. It's completely awesome, and it shares all the same games, so I don't think that the Switch 1 is necessarily going to go offline immediately. It's not going to go offline until the Switch 2 is kaput once again. So anyways, that's my theory on what's going to happen here, because honestly, I don't see it any other way. I think that these two consoles are connected and are always going to be connected because they're so similar. Unless all of a sudden Nintendo decides to take a left turn and completely change everything, get hundreds and hundreds of different games and get themes and all of this stuff, well then maybe we can see a little bit of online functionality discontinued, maybe 2031. But for now, where the trajectory of Nintendo Switch 2 is going, it's looking to be very well connected to Nintendo Switch 1. So in that opinion, I think that they're probably just gonna live together forever. I could be completely wrong about this, but to me, it makes the most sense of why would you shut down a console that people can still use to play with? They don't have to get a Nintendo Switch 2 if they don't want to. Maybe they can use their 15-year-old Nintendo Switch if they want to. Like, who cares? It's just a Nintendo Switch, honestly. But maybe you can see it as the point of, hey, Nintendo's a business and they want to sell Swish 2. So maybe they want to shut down the online service just so you have to buy a Nintendo Switch 2. Now, if that's the case, I think that the servers would be shut down in 2030. Everything is gone kaput by 2030 if that's the case. But since it's highly advertised, it's probably not going to shut down before Nintendo is ready to shut it down, ready to move on from Switch 2. But yeah, anyways, thank you so much for watching. I wonder what you think about the Nintendo Switch 2. Do you think that these two systems are matched? Do you think that the Nintendo Switch 1 will just all of a sudden go kaput? Like I said, the games are probably going to go kaput by 2027, but I don't think the online service is going to be shut down anytime soon. Anyways, yeah, I hope you have a fantastic day, and consider hit the like button, maybe subscribing if you're new. And with that being said, thanks again to Isaiah Fisher for this video idea. Anyways, see you in the next one.